All right, welcome back everybody to our channel, to Mark and Pat's Power Hour Real Estate channel. Today we're going to go over the chapters in the Real Estate Principles book from chapter 17 through chapters 21 or 22 or so. Also hopeful to catch up with Pat on what's been happening over the past couple of weeks with, things in the real estate market here in California. I'm sure he's got some interesting stories to relay to us and give us some insights and hopefully entertain us a little bit with that stuff. How you doing today, Pat? How's everything going, sir?
It's going well, sir. Thank you very much for asking. Yes, it's been an action-packed 2 weeks. As we always say in the business, one of my mentors many, many years ago, my first primary real estate mentor told me, Patrick, I think you'll really do well at real estate sales, but I want you to also keep your options open and go into investing yourself and so forth. And she said, and I said, well, why do you say that? She goes, well, real estate's a chicken and feathers business. You're either eating a lot of chicken or a lot of feathers when you don't have any deals. So, when we last were speaking, I think I had one deal that was going on. I was working on other deals, and currently I have 5 open escrows, and that happened very rapidly. The bulk of those are from past clients. Most of my business these days comes from past clients or referred clients. As a matter of fact, one of those clients that we're closing tomorrow in LA, I've been in contact with this person for over 10 years. She first was referred to me from one of her work colleagues. I have been educating her on the market. She was a young woman when I first met her, in her 20s. Now she's in her mid-30s and married recently within the last year. Her life has changed, jumping in the first-time home market, which in the market that she's dealing with is $1 million plus, believe it or not, first-time home, right? Wow. But her husband works in entertainment business, hits a lot of runs, she does well, and but there's an example of somebody that how important it is to stay in touch with people. I've stayed in touch with her for in excess of 10 years, and so it's very important to have a very solid database and a very proactive touch method where you're reaching out to people, whether it's phone call, whether it's email, whatever it is. You need to develop the system for you, because that's how quickly things can change in this business. I have one deal in, there's 25,000. All of a sudden, 5 deals in, there's 100,000. So it changes rapidly.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear you're doing so well.
And one of those deals, and one of those deals I want to touch on a little bit, a very important story to me, based on a reason why I do this. And I believe you do this and want to do this, but it's a very poignant story from one of my past clients that I've done 9+ deals with, that I'm in another deal with right now. And I'll share that with you at the end today.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with these questions here. So chapter 17 from the Real Estate Practices or Principles deals with the NHD, or the Natural Hazard Disclosures. So what I wanted to ask you was, what should I be aware of as far as natural hazard disclosures? And then also, what is the Alquist-Priolo map? What does that have to do with?
Got it. So an NHD, we refer to it as an NHD report. It stands for Natural Hazard Disclosure. It's something that all sellers give to a buyer within the first 7 days of a real estate transaction once you open escrow.
Okay.
It's one of the seller 7-day statutory disclosures. NHD, Natural Hazard Disclosure. It touches on natural hazards around that property, such as flood zones, fire zones, liquefaction zones, earthquake zones, things to that regard. Also, there'll be potentially Mello-Roos disclosures on there, right? That's a special assessment bond that would be inherent to specific properties, usually built after 1990. But so it's just anything that's going on around that property, right, in a natural hazard zone.
Okay, good.
And the other disclosure that you talked about is within that. See, within California, there are various zones, various earthquake zones. Another one would be San Andreas Fault, for example. There's various fault lines out in the ocean that cut state, that run through the Central Valley, and there's specific zones, right? That's just one of the specific zones within, and also would be something that would be on the NHD report.
Okay, so this is something that you would give to a prospective buyer within the first 7 days of entering into an agreement, so they would be aware of anything that has to do with a natural hazard that might be in the area of the house they're looking at, right?
Correct. From a state standpoint, right? Uh, Local to the house and the land around it. You know, that's one of the many reports that a seller would give to the buyer, and of course that's sourced from a third-party vendor, right? Every once in a while, I talk like an American. When I say, I would normally say party, like an Australian would. So sometimes when I fumble over my words, it's because I'm like, should I say this American or should I say it Australian? How should I say it? Anyway.
The confusion that's going on in your eyes, I see a little bit of like going there, like what's going on?
Yeah. So, you know, we use a lot of vendors throughout a real estate transaction, escrow companies, title companies. An NHD report, there's multiple NHD reporting companies, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's multiples and they charge roughly the same amount of money. And some have more inclusive reports and some less inclusive reports. But it's sourced from a third-party vendor, unlike an SPQ or a TDS, which is something the seller actually touches and fills out and gives to the buyer. Whereas an NHD report comes from a third-party vendor and is passed along to the buyer.
Okay, so you mentioned the term liquefaction. Can you define that more clearly? What liquefaction means?
Yeah, I've never had it ever happen. Any liquefaction is just basically when the earth shakes in an earthquake, right? And basically it shakes so much it makes the soil so unstable that it just loosens it where the house could just drop right into the hole, right? Create like a sinkhole.
Oh, okay. All right, well that's to know. If you're getting ready to
Yeah, good to know. Good to know. So you'd want to know if your house is in a liquefaction zone or things like that. You know, if a lot of slope locations potentially would be, you know, subject to liquefaction, right? If it shook enough and that slope gave way, you know, you'd want to know that.
Yeah, you know, when I lived in San Pedro, driving out to Palos Verdes via the coast, they used to speak about that a lot. They didn't, you know, use the terminology liquefaction, but they could, you know, people were always talking about that house used to be here 20 years ago. Now it's here, and it's going closer to the ocean. So I guess that's pretty much a good example of that then. And then again, you said the Alquist Paola maps have to do with, this is a map that is showing you these different kinds of NHD possibilities. That's correct, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that'll be within the NHD report.
Okay, great. All right, so the next chapter, Pat, goes on to talk about lead-based paint disclosures. So there's something here that I was curious about because it says something prior to 1978. So I would imagine that liquid-based paint was being used more predominantly back before those years. So can you talk to,
Lead-based paint.
yeah, can you talk to me a little bit about what I should know about liquid-based paint disclosures?
Lead-based paint, not liquid-based.
Went to liquefaction, and sorry about that. Lead-based. So
Yeah, so lead-based,
I become Australian too, so.
there you go, you became Australian. Yeah, so in America, you know, up until 1978, they were still using lead within paint, right? But, you know, all the EPA standards in California, you know, got more and more onerous about a lot of different things, you know, the standards of building, earthquake standards, materials that we used, and paint is one of them. So if any property built 1978 or prior, you must include a lead-based paint disclosure, right? Which is FLA disclosure, right? So any property that you list or sell, to sell, you would expect your client to fill out a lead-based paint disclosure, just stating, I'm giving you this, Mr. Buyer. I'm not saying there's lead-based paint in this house, but there's a good chance that somewhere in this house, under 15 layers of other paint, there could be lead-based paint there.
Mm.
And I've had it explained to me this way from inspectors that The same way that asbestos, if you leave it in place, is not a problem. It's when you move it and becomes airborne and breathe it, it's a problem. The same way with lead-based paint. If it's on the wall and there under 15 different layers of paint, it's not going anywhere. It's fine. I mean, if you go up to the wall or a door jamb and start chewing on it and you chew into the paint, I guess it could be a problem for you. But as long as it's there and not messed with, there's potentially no harm from it. Again, like I said, I say this as a real estate agent, not an inspector, but that's how it's been explained to me from inspectors.
Okay, well, I'm glad you described it like that, because as I was reading this chapter, I didn't realize that was one of the questions I kind of had about it, like how affecting is it to, the general health of someone occupying a house, depending upon, I guess, like you're saying, like if there's layers of paint over it, and if it's being disturbed some kind of way, then that would and that actually factors into how you describe the thing about, what did you say? Pat?
If you leave it in place.
No, the stuff you use for insulation.
Oh yeah, asbestos.
Asbestos, that's the word. Anyways, yeah, so that makes sense, because I was curious about how that works. But basically, we wouldn't have to worry about lead-based paint situations unless it was a house that was built prior to 1978. Is that correct? It wouldn't have much?
Correct. That's the only reason. That's the only time you would be required to use that disclosure, 1978 or before. If the house was built in 1979, you might want to still include it just because it was really close, right?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't be required if you definitively knew the house was built in 1979 or 1980. You wouldn't be required. 1978 or prior, you must use it.
Okay, good to know. All right, so moving on to the next chapter here. Next chapter it's titled Prior Occupants' Use, Affliction, and Death. So this is curious to me. This basically has to do with if someone has died in the house 3 years prior. So my question about this was, how often do people bring up this question? I mean, it seems like a pretty common thing that people should ask, but is it something people ask about? Do people talk about this too much?
We talked about disclosures, right? And we talked about NHD being a third-party disclosure from a different vendor. One of the other disclosures we talked about was an SPQ disclosure that's filled out from the seller of the property. One of the questions on the SPQ is, has anybody died in this property in the last 3 years? Now, why 3 years? I don't know. I guess spirits disappear after 3 years and 1 day or something.
That's a good one.
I guess there's like a holding period. You know what? This spirit lasts for 36 months, no more. But I have no idea, man. But I can tell you this, that first came into prominence during around the time the AIDS epidemic came into prominence in California. And, in interest of, I deal with a lot of people. I deal with a lot of ethnicities to buy properties, right? I deal with a lot of white people like me. I deal with Chinese people. I deal with Vietnamese people. I deal with Persians. I deal with Middle East people. And different ethnicities have different sensitivities around death. For example, in the Chinese ethnicity, they have a lot of problems with people that have died in the house. They see it as an issue, it's a major issue. So it's everybody has a different comfort level, to everything on a deal, from money, disclosures, whatever it can be. We're not all, cookie cutter stamped. Yeah. So it first came into prominence around that time, when there was a lot of hype around that. They didn't know, the same way they don't know a lot of things about COVID right now. Whether if you've had it, are you going to get it again? They don't know. The same thing around AIDS. There was all kinds of hype when AIDS first came about. They thought you could get it by breathing it in the air. They didn't know. So like I said, I guess after 3 years, it dissipated. Why they have that thing, why they say 3 years, I have no idea. But a seller has no responsibility, obligation, or duty to disclose that if they're lovely mother that lived with them up until the day she died, and she died in the house. This happened to me on a property I sold last year, where the mother did die in the house 5, 7, 8 years ago, but they didn't have to disclose it because it didn't die in there within the last 3 years.
Okay. Well, yeah, that makes just curious because but it makes a lot of sense. You said certain ethnicity groups probably just because of the kind of, kind of
Beliefs.
have different kind of ideas about that, different feelings about it. So it makes sense. So that's on the, but that is something that's specifically listed on the SPQ, you said?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good to know. All right, let's move on because that was pretty much all that chapter was about. Let's go on to chapter 20. This is marketing condominium units.
Mm.
Okay, so now this thing here, what is a pro forma operating budget? What is that? Pro forma operating budget.
You know, the easiest way that I've always understood the word pro forma, okay, is pro forma is a prediction, right?
Okay.
A budget is a plan, right? So budget is, I need $100 this month to buy groceries. I must have it. A pro forma is a prediction. I'll potentially need $100 this month to buy certain things, right? You'll see pro forma come up mostly when you're buying or selling residential income property, because you'll see two numbers noted on the MLS. One is an actual number. The rents right now on these two units are $2,000 and $2,500 for the second unit, right? Total rental of $4,500 a month. And then over to the right of that, you'll see pro forma rents, stating those two rents right there, we've had those rents in play for the last 5 years. So when you buy this house, Mr. New Investment Buyer, the pro forma numbers are this, $2,800 and $3,200. Those are pro forma numbers, right? Those are prediction numbers that we believe once you buy it, you could increase the rent, or that's what the pro forma number would be. It's a prediction.
Okay.
So that's the best way to look at it. Just always think of pro forma as a prediction and budget as a plan, right? A budget is an actual number. A pro forma is a projected number.
Okay, good. So that was a great explanation, by the way. Okay, next question. How is marketing a condo different than other types of property?
Marketing it different. I wouldn't say the marketing, from a marketing standpoint, it would be different. The disclosures are different because, you know, in condos, you 100% have HOAs, right? Homeowners associations. And when you have a homeowners association, you have a budget, you have meetings, you have pro forma numbers, you have budget numbers, all of these things. So you have, from a disclosure standpoint, you have different disclosures. And also from a financing standpoint for people to buy, there's differences too. There's certain loans that you can only use in condo associations. For example, they want to know, for example, on specific loans like FHA loans and so forth, they may not lend in a condominium association if, say, 50% of the units are non-owner occupied, because they see it as a speculation property, right? There's too much speculating in there. There's not enough owner occupants that have skin in the game, that are connected to the community, you know, so they follow. So it's more, I wouldn't think the marketing is as important as what buyers you're looking for and the disclosures that are involved.
Okay.
Like most of the questions I get when I have a condominium that I have listed is, hey, Patrick, is your condominium association VA approved, which is Veterans Administration, right? Because they have no skin in the game when they buy. They get 100% financing, veterans, okay? And so it has to be a VA approved condo complex, right? Or they'll say, is it an FHA approved condo complex, right? FHA and VA only lend to certain condominium associations. So from a financing standpoint, it's more important than a marketing standpoint.
Okay.
And I guess, so when you're marketing, your disclosures are this is a VA approved complex. This is an FHA approved complex. Whereas a single family house and a VA house, they all qualify for FHA and VA.
Okay. More when you're talking about selling a condominium, it's more about the different kinds of disclosures that are involved.
Yeah, I guess, and from a marketing standpoint, noting that to the general public and or to agents that this is an FHA approved complex, a VA approved complex. As I think about that, I think the chapter you read is probably having you think more about those things, about when you're marketing it, make sure you disclose these certain things so buyers know that. Because if they have an FHA loan or a VA loan and your condominium tract is not VA or FHA, you know, you don't want to waste your time with those people, right? Because they can't buy in there.
Right. Okay. They also bring up some things called regular assessments, special assessments, things like that, kind of letting you understand that there are certain things that are, you know, that you're going to be paying for through the HOA because of it being a condominium development. So I think that's kind of leaning into that a little bit as well as what you just discussed.
Special assessments are also noted on your NHD report, right? Because there's zone disclosures, right? Specific to that area where the house is, there's a special assessment there. There's a Mello-Roos bond there for the next 20 years. There's a 1915 infrastructure bond there for the next 20 years. It started 10 years ago, so it's going to have 10 or 15 more years to go, and then it will fall off the property. So yes, so those things are important to know.
Okay, can you describe a little bit about what Mello-Roos is again?
Mello and Roos were two California guys, senators, I believe they were. And a Mello-Roos bond is an infrastructure bond. Years ago, the builders would come in to develop an area and they would float all the bonds themselves and they would pass that along as additional cost in the house, right? So years ago, non-Mello-Roos properties would sell for, say, $50,000 to $100,000 more than a Mello-Roos house, because on a Mello-Roos house, you have more what I call front-end loaded cost, more property tax every month, right? So they pass that along on your property tax bill as a Mello-Roos bond. These two guys, Mello and Roos, came up with this so that developers wouldn't have to float all the money up front. They could pass it along the consumer as a bond that would be against the house that would be paid over 20 to 25 years. And the Mello-Roos bond would pay for parks, schools, green belts, infrastructure for the neighborhood.
Okay. Okay. All right, let's move on to the next chapter here. The next chapter is the home inspection report. So what should I know about, well, the home inspection report, but there's a question I do have. What should be understood about the California Home Energy Rating System?
Yeah, it's a standard. That's something more, again, that's more of a vendor question, in my opinion, right?
Okay.
It's a rating system, home energy efficiency. How efficient is this house based on the furnace that's in there, the condenser that's in the house, the windows that are in the house, right? Mm-hmm. In comparison to, you know, a house, for example, that we were talking about, 1978, a house that was built in 1978 compared to 2020. I mean, we had very different standards, right? Mm-hmm. Building standards have gone up every decade. I mean, even things that you put in your house nowadays, when I tell people, once you put in a new dishwasher, you got to figure it's about a 10-year play on that dishwasher. You put in a new garbage disposal, it's about a 10-year life cycle. Once you do things like that, you got to be ready to replace them when you sell your house or update them after 10 years. It's really just an efficiency. How energy efficient is your house? That's something to discuss with the home inspector at that time. One of the reports we do when the home inspector is doing his inspection is something we call an AVID, Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure, right? AVID is the acronym, and it's self-explanatory, Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure. We got to walk the house and just give it a visual inspection. I see a mark on the wall there. I see a broken tile. I see dirty things, whatever it may be. And so you just point out visual things on that report. We don't get into technical things, right? Like the HERS efficiency standard. Mm-hmm. All homes nowadays have to be brought up to that HERS standard that you're talking about. That's the current 2020 standard that all houses have to be built by. Low flow toilets, efficient, all the water conserving plumbing, all of those things, right? But houses built in 1980 will not come up to those standards, and a seller won't have to bring them up to those standards. It's just something we have to disclose to them that, yeah, you should be aware of this standard, but it's not a point of sale requirement that a seller has to update their house to a 2020 standard when the house was built in 1980.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Was there anything else to do that? So a home energy audit, is that the same thing we were just talking about?
Yes, I mean that would the inspector just to audit all those major appliances to see how efficient they are in comparison to a 2020 standard, right? Okay. How efficient is how efficient are the windows in the property? Dual glazed, low E windows nowadays in comparison to single pane glass from 1975 or something, right? Yeah. No comparison how much more efficient they are. So it's just letting a seller know that, right? But I can tell you, in selling real estate in all of these decades, I've never had a buyer say to me, this is not a non-efficient house based on the HERS standard.
Right.
They just know, as we walk around a house as an agent, I'll say to them, well, here's a good feature. All of the windows in this house have been replaced. They're not original windows from 1970. They're all dual pane. And the seller's noting that they were put in 5 years ago. That's a big deal because not only for the energy rating, but also for the efficiency and the cost of the window, right? It's a big repair to change all the windows out in a house could be $20,000, $30,000 and more, depending on what sort of windows you go with.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So with the home inspection report, I'm curious, how impacting is that to somebody when they look at that, like a potential buyer? I mean, obviously this has to be done, but how knowledgeable are buyers about how important this report is?
Everybody has a different comfort level. You could get a home inspection report, and it could be a completely inflaming document for someone to see. An inspector, keep in mind, an inspector is going to look at that house, and for the most part, the report will look like the house is falling down. If it's an old house compared to 2020 standards, right? But as an agent, you need to counsel your clients and tell them that, look, yes, the report is a big voluminous document he created, but we know what we're buying. We're buying a house from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, whatever it may be, sometimes 100 years ago. And it's been brought up to standard mostly. And of the 20 things the inspector called out, there might be 10 that we're really focused on. And the other 10 are just throwaway items that are going to be $20 fix, $30 fix, $50 fix, really. And they may just be considered normal wear and tear or maintenance items. The bigger issues are always the issues we're focused on.
Okay. Let's move on to the next chapter. The next chapter is structural pest control reports and repairs. So, what is a separated report?
A separated report?
Yeah.
That, I've never heard it referred to that way, to be 100% honest with you. A separated report. When a pest report is given, there are two things that are pointed out. They refer to it as a Section 1 or a Section 2 repair.
Okay.
And maybe separated. Maybe they're referring to it.
Pat, it says right here, a report issued by a structural pest control company, which is divided into Section 1 items and Section 2 items.
There you go, what I just said. So it's basically, so Section 1 items would be active infestation and or dry rot, okay? Because those are structural issues to a house. Termites can live for 30 years, so they'll keep eating and eating and eating until your house is nothing, right? And they're also inherent into California. Dana Point and Laguna Beach, for example, are like ground zero for termites.
Hmm.
Every property down there is impacted in some way. If it's not termites, it's dry rot due to the moist coastal air and the fog that's inherent. That just, if the wood, if the paint gets a little bit old on the wood and all that moisture can get into wood, it's going to cause dry rot.
Hmm.
So that's called out on the report as Section 1 repairs. Section 2 would be if the termite company walked through there and saw a mark on the wall or a hole in something and just pointed it out and said, I see a hole in the wall there, a mark in the wall. You may want to check it later. It's really Section 2 on my report. It's not active infestation or dry rot, so I'm not calling it out as a Section 1 repair. Section 1 repair is something that sellers usually always do. Section 2 would be something that also a home inspector may point out and that a buyer would look to maybe remedy at a later date.
Okay. All right. So my question about this is in California, the pest control certification, you're saying that you were saying that in that area in Laguna and Dana Point, that's like ground zero for this. How, I mean, how impacting is this pest control certification thing because of California's, geographical location and how termites are affected where we live?
It's impactful this way from financing standpoint. If it's noted on the contract, that work has to be completed before the lender will lend on that house. Because like I mentioned, they're not going to lend on a property that's falling down that has structural termites throughout it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're protecting their investment, and they're going to make sure that all Section 1 termite work has been completed before they lend money on a property that has termites, because they can be so devastating. A lot of agents in LA, for example, when you fill out a RPA, a residential purchase agreement, they don't even want you to write on the contract, seller to provide a termite report. The contract calls out that a buyer can do any reports that and any inspections he wants to within the contingency period, whether that's 10 days, the contract defaults to 17 days, but a lot of agents want to shorten that up to 10 days. I'm in a lot of 10-day deals right now.
Okay.
So they don't even want you to note it on the contract, because if it's not noted on the contract, then the lender doesn't have to see it. It's not noted there. It's not been made a part of the contract. The contract already states you can do anything, but unless you actually physically put that into the contract, and if they see it, they want to see it. They want to see the report.
Okay.
So if you omit it, you can still do the report and pay for it yourself and still request that the seller fix those issues. But it's just something to think about when you get down to contracts. So when you write your first contract, I want to look it over, and I want to just make sure everything is fine from a performance standpoint, that you're going to position a very strong contract that can get accepted.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. The lender is aware of what's going on with this. They're going to poke at it, and if you don't, you can still do the inspections, but that would be between the buyer and the seller, more or less, than having a lender even look at it, right?
Yes, I had it countered out on me on several contracts recently. No inspection contingency, no Section 1 repairs, or no termite report. I had it countered out, and I just said, listen, let me get inside your mind a little bit. Why do you keep counting me out on this? And, well, Patrick, we don't want the lender to be brought into this and nix the deal based on that and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. So didn't preclude me from doing it, but they just didn't want it on the contract.
Right. Well, is this a new kind of thing that's more common now?
Yeah, well, I can tell you it is in LA. In Orange County, it's still on every contract. We always include it, and there's no issues, and everyone knows the expectation around it. But in LA, no way. Safety in numbers, I guess.
Huh. Interesting. Okay, Pat. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions for the book, all the way up to chapter 22. So,
cool.
Let's go. I'm really curious to hear the stories of what's been going on with you and what's happening. I know you going on.
Yeah. Well, I sent you a couple of videos. I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to them. From the gentleman that wrote The Greatest Salesman in the World, right? Og Mandino.
Right. I did get a chance.
Did you see?
Yeah.
Did you hear the story that he told about the Japanese fable?
Japanese fable. Remind me. I watched the whole video. I'm trying to remember.
Really, that one story he told jumped out at me and just grabbed me by the head and wrestled me to the ground. He talked about this old fable about this mountain in the central highlands of Japan that had a flat top on it, and it was surrounded by jungle. And the name of the mountain was the place where you took your parents when they got old.
Oh,
Do you recall that?
I don't recall that. Go ahead and refresh me on it, though.
Right. So there was this, as the story goes, it was, and so having known that, there was a young man that was going straight towards that mountain through the brushes, and on his shoulders was this little wisp of a lady, which was his mother. And as he was traipsing through, going towards this mountain, he noticed out of the corner of his eye, this lady his mother was doing something, and he was half annoyed because he felt bad about taking his mother and leaving her there. And he was half annoyed about what she was doing, and what she was doing, he kept seeing out of the corner of her eye, she was doing this. And he looked up at her and he goes, "Mother, what are you doing?" And she said, and she looked down at him with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Oh, nothing, son. I'm just breaking off some branches and throwing them on the ground so that you'll find your way home after you leave me on the mountain." You know, and it was such a poignant story because it's a story about success leaving clues, right? And we always want to leave a trail for our children to hopefully follow in an easier way than we go, right? And that story has a lot of poignancy to it. And that story really meant a lot to me about this fable and how things were always, and because success leaves clues. It's the reason why you and I talk. I want you to learn things that I've had to learn the hard way, right? And maybe it'll be a little bit better. Maybe you'll remember a story I told you and go, "Hey, Patrick was in a deal like this once. Here's how it turned out," right? Success leaves clues.
All right.
So one of the deals I'm in right now is with I call him a VIP client. He trusts me implicitly, and he's buying this house with a very specific intent right now. One of his wife's sister has cancer. So he's buying the house for them to put them in a more stable situation so his wife can come and take care of her own sister in a better setting than where they're living right now, right? And so when I was able to finesse him into this deal, there were a lot of moving parts. The person that was selling the house was connected to a lender that I use a lot, right? And I mentioned to her who we were using and how I've done multiple deals with my client and with this lender. We can perform right away. We're golden. Please give us a shot at this. But we had to bid that property up $20,000 above the list price. But he didn't care. He would have gone up even higher. But he said to me, "So we got it." And I shared with him why we got it and how this agent said, "I'm really glad I got you, Patrick, because I know you're going to perform. And your lender's great. I'm just so happy. Day one, I would have taken you, but I had to give you a multiple counteroffer with all these other deals, but you won." And so he saw that, and he was grateful for that, me being a part of his team, and he knows the importance of teamwork, right? And so he said to me when we went there to do the inspection on the house, he took me outside and he goes, "Hey, Patrick, I just want you to know how grateful that I am for you. I know, you were able to get this deal based on how you work behind the scenes, but this house means so much more to me than all of my other deals." And he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 properties, right? All cash flow properties that are investments. And this one, he's going to make money on it, but not nearly what he would if it was a regular investment. But he told me how much more it meant to him because of why he was doing it, right? He was doing it for this why reason. And I told him, "Listen, man, I thank you so much, first of all, for trusting me to handle all your business for you. And also thank you for sharing that story with me because you know how much and why I do things in my business, right? I have to advise my clients to walk on deals sometime. And I work 100% commission. I don't make any money. If my client cancels 3 days before the close of escrow, I make nothing. So I'm fully invested in these deals with them as well. But I have to tell them it's time to cancel. this guy's screwing us around. But when someone tells me how important this deal is, not for money-making reasons, but because of this family reason, and how he was so excited to see their children so happy about the rooms they were picking out and how much that meant to him, it was touching for me. It was just a really nice reminder of why I do this.
Yeah. I love that story, Pat. You know, it's, again, we talked about this a while back about.
And you know, the other story about.
Oh, go ahead. I think we lost each other. Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, you froze up on me for a sec there.
Go ahead, Pat. Finish what you were saying.
Yeah, I can. No, I can hear you now. I'm pretty much finished with my story and those things. So what did you have to say?
I was just saying that, you know, that's part of what I'm grateful for in our relationship is the fact that, you know, this business, like I said, anytime you're selling things where it's high dollar amounts and things like that, obviously people's ethics can be swayed in different directions to kind of gain advantages. But what I do like, and I know this about you, is your sense of integrity. And that story just speaks of that whole thing of how it's affecting. It's nice that you're able to affect people on that level and be involved, and they know that about you. They trust that about you. So your story just speaks volumes of, again, speaking of your integrity. And, you know, I'm glad to be involved with this with you because I want to learn this business from someone like you. I don't want to learn this business from someone else who is, you know, like I said, bending their lines of integrity and their ethics here and there. So I'm glad to know that, you know, that's a great story, actually. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing story. I was so happy that he shared that with me. I have a close relationship with him and he leans on me for a lot of things, and I'm able to provide things to him very quickly. I keep an eye on all of his properties very closely, documents, things that he'll need throughout the years. Like I said, he's a very VIP client. I worked in a family business where it was all about protecting the family, right?
Right.
Protecting the family. My clients are like my family now. So I got multiples of families now everywhere.
Yeah.
I got to protect them as best I can and shelter them on deals. So I was with another client of mine today, a legacy client too, and we were talking about leasing and a long-term property that I'm going to be listing soon. And it's the same level of engagement and trust there. But that story really meant a lot to me when he shared that with me about how important he felt this was and the joy he was feeling in helping, you know, his wife and then his sister-in-law and their children and all of these things. It's really big stuff, and it's important to sit back when people are sharing those stories with you and just feel that a little bit about what you're doing, you know, and remember that success does leave clues when you work well with people. And you're also representing yourself and this other vendor, and this other agent knows that vendor. There's lots of different ways to get deals, and you've got to work every angle you have.
Mm. That makes good sense. But, you know, I mean, these things we're talking about are just life ethics that I believe in. You know, just being a part of the best way you can for a situation to help someone to facilitate those things that they know are good for, whether it's family or friends or whatever way it is, helping someone to get to a better place than they were before. Those kind of things are ethics, I think, that are, you know, we need to maintain those in our humanity consistently.
Yeah,
The world needs
absolutely.
a little bit more sometimes. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad.
All right, well, I hope you have a successful week of reading and absorbing, and we'll get back on this next week.
Yes, sounds good, Pat. Anyways, success for all the stuff you're doing this week as well.
Thank you, sir.
Everything that you do, and we'll catch up next week and start this again, all right?
Thanks, Mark. Have a successful week, sir. I'll talk to you soon.
You too, Pat. Take care.
Bye.